آل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. The verse I recited is, of course, this verse from Surah Al-Fajr, and we have a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and he says, recite Surah Al-Fajr in your wajib and your nafilah, your mustahab prayers, because it will remind you of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He said, because this verse is talking about Imam Hussein. So the subject I want to talk about tonight, inshallah, which I've been kind of covering the last few nights, is some of the rituals and things that we do as a Shia, and what are the basis for these things, and how authentic are they. So, our dear brother Shahangan, he mentioned something very interesting. He talked about how they used to curse Imam Islam at the masjids, and it became a practice of the people to do so. So, I remember when I was young, I was told that to counteract this cursing, we had added Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah into the adhan. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that subject. I think it's good to bring these subjects up, and I'm glad we have a community which is educated and, mashallah, civilized and open-minded to discuss these things, to understand their history, because we've had some people now in recent times come and question the authenticity of certain actions that we do. One of them being saying Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah in adhan. So, inshallah, I would like to talk a little bit about the history of this, where it's come from, and what the opinion of most of the scholars is on this issue, and why we do it, and inshallah. So, is it reality? Is it really because of the cursing of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam? If we actually take a look at the books of history and the books of scholars, it's more complicated than that. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So, recently we've had some scholars who have said that we shouldn't recite Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Shia scholars. So, what are they basing that off of? When we get our narrations, when we have compiled our narrations, they were compiled by some of the scholars from the very beginning, from the early period, during the time of the Ghaib al-Sughra and then afterwards. So, one of those scholars, for example, Shaykh al-Saduq. I'm sure most of you have heard of him. Ibn Babawayh Qummi. So, these people who say that we cannot recite this, mostly they're relying on what he said and some scholars after him. So he said that, for example, he said we don't find this in the hadith of the Imams. And his statement in that sense is correct. From the hadith of the Imams, when they narrated the adhan to the people, they didn't say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah in that adhan. Do they have any narration from the Imam explicitly saying that people should add Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah to the adhan at any time? According to Shaykh Saduq, he said no, but what he said is this though. He said there is a group of people, group from among us, he said we consider them to be extremists, and they have some narrations which say to add Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah in the adhan. And he said we disregard these narrations. We don't count them. So, after him, the scholars after him, they mentioned the same opinion as him, and they said we didn't compile these narrations at all. So we don't have, today we don't have access to any of these narrations which they said had said that. Because they said these people are extremists, ghali. So this is ghulat. This is a type of kufr, basically. Ghulat is a type of kufr. So there are different definitions of what is considered ghulat and what isn't. And I'm going to get to what Shaykh Saduq was talking about in his definition of ghulat. So, after him, of course, we have many great scholars, Shaykh al-Mufid, Shaykh al-Tusi, and they said similar to what he had said. They said that we don't find this, and this we have left it to those people who are ghali, so we don't say that within the adhan. And this continues through most of the scholars. But one interesting thing that Shaykh Tusi said, he said this. He said, if somebody has added it and they had said it, he said it's not a sin. And he was differing in that opinion than the other scholars at that time. So he said this is not a sin. It's not a sin. Walaikum assalam. So we see most of the major scholars from Sheikh Saduq, Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Tusi after him, the other scholars who came after that, Alamat al-Hilli, other scholars, Muhaqqaq al-Hilli, and we see all of them pretty much had the same exact opinions, and they didn't actually differ from this very much at all. We come, for example, much later down, we see Muqaddas Ardabili, one of our other great scholars. So what he had said was, adding Ali Waliullah, he said, no, this is a type of thing that the extremists did, it's not allowed. But he mentioned something interesting. He said, for example, though, if somebody hears the name Muhammad Rasulullah, in the it is acceptable for them to say salawat. I think some of you misunderstood me. I didn't say for you to say salawat. I said it is acceptable for them to say salawat. Okay. So, continue. So we have, now he's saying that you can say something, because he said this is not part of the adhan. Continuing. When did it enter into the mainstream ship? We see from history, this happened at the time of the Safavid period. So when the Safavid period rose in Iran, we saw the entering of Ali Waliullah into the adhan. Then at the time, that scholars, they started having a different opinion. They said, okay, now we are able to say this, and it has become identity of the Shia to say Ali Waliullah. So they said, because of this, acceptable. And the interesting big difference came with the Alam al-Majlisi al-Awwal. We have two Alam al-Majlisi, the one who compiled Bahar al-Anwar and the one that came before him. So he had some very interesting point to say about this, and actually this agrees with my opinion as well. And he said, why should we say? He said, one, when we're looking at what the scholars of the past said, what Sheikh Saduq said, he said he was disregarding a lot of these narrations because he said, oh, these people are ghali, and then he threw these narrations out, we never got a chance to see them. So what, for example, he said, what is his definition of somebody who's ghali? So you go into the books and you'll see that Sheikh Saduq had some very very strict definitions of who is considered to be extremist. And that probably, if we hear that today, we won't accept that. Like, for example, he has a belief. He said that if somebody believes that the Prophet made sahu in his prayer, it means he forgot in his prayer while he's praying. He said if somebody believes that the Prophet never forgot in his prayers ever, he's a ghali. He's also ghali. So this was belief of Sheikh Saduq. And he based that on a narration he has. And that narration, we have it. It's one of the books. But this narration is weak. Its chain of narrative is weak. So, we see this argument, this is the argument of the Majlisi, the first Majlisi. And he says, okay, so we can say that possibly, that he threw out these narrations without looking at them. And then furthermore, he says, if we're allowed to say, for example, Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, after we hear Muhammad Rasulullah in the adhan, he said, why can't we say Ali Waliullah? Why not? And so he brings further proof. He says that also there is a narration, and this narration exists. He said that, and this is found in one of our older books from Alama Tabrasi, and he said that if anyone hears Muhammad Rasulullah, he should add Ali Waliullah. It's good to add it. So then most of the scholars, they changed that opinion, and until today, we have pretty much the same opinion. Also, they added, and now in this current period, for example, some of the late scholars who passed away not that long ago, Ayatollah Iraqi, Sayyid Muhammad Shirazi, they had some other opinion. They said also we have some narrations, and these narrations, they do exist in the books of Ahlul Sunnah, and it says that one time, Bilal and another one has Abu Dhar, that people had heard them saying Ali Waliullah in the adhan. And then the people had gone to Rasulullah and they asked him about that. He said, well, you have heard it, something good. But there are scholars today who dispute this narration. So what we see now is that there are scholars coming out today who are saying that this Ashhadu Ali Waliullah, it shouldn't be said because the Imams never said it. So this was the history of it, and this is a very condensed history of it. Now the scholars today, for example, most of the Maraja today, and this is something important for people to understand when they do their worship, like for example, Sayyid Sistani, he says that when you recite the adhan, you're allowed to say Aliyah without no problem. But if you believe with the intention that this is actually part of the adhan, then this is no wrong. This is wrong. He said this is a bid'ah. But adding it to the adhan and saying it with the adhan, he says no problem. It's not a problem. This is in the Risala. So, and it can be a type of mustahab. So this, I want to bring this to attention because there's a lot of people talking about this now. It's become a issue with some communities as well. Well, and I think it's good to talk about these things, especially in the month of Muharram. A lot of people come, and there's a larger audience. And also, the month of Muharram, Imam Hussein al-Islam, he was there to make things clear to the people, so that all the information should be clear. We should discuss these things openly, and it shouldn't be a problem. Another issue I want to talk about, which is also an issue that many people debate and talk about, is tatbir, Tamazani. Where does this practice come from? What's its history? And what do the scholars actually say about this? Is this allowed? Is this from Ahlul Bayt? So, if we look at the narrations of Ahlul Bayt, do we see that this was practiced by Ahlul Bayt as a regular practice? No. If we look at the narrations, we don't see this, and all the scholars agree on that. There is no narration to state that this was a regular practice of Ahlul Bayt. But there is one narration, one hadith that exists, and it says that Sayyidah Zainab was in the bazaar of Kufa, and she hit her head with a metal pole until it started bleeding. So this hadith has some disagreement upon it by the scholars. This was found. The first time that they saw this hadith, was in Bihar al-Anwar from Imam al-Majlisi. But the issue is, it's not found in books prior to Bihar al-Anwar. So we look at the time of Imam al-Majlisi and the time when they started collecting the hadiths and putting the books, is almost 1,000 years. So if one were to say that this hadith came from them, it's difficult. It's difficult to prove that the hadith is authenticated because of that. Because this was the first time it was found in the book of Imam al-Majlisi. So, but there are scholars who accept this as well. Now, their argument is, and the scholars who are against it, they say even if we accept this narration, this does not prove that this action is acceptable. Even if we say Zainab did it once, how can we say that it's acceptable? The other scholar says, no, this is proof for it because Zainab doesn't act on something too much of emotion. The hadith say that she has like a type of isma, so she doesn't do things out of emotion. This was an act to bring attention. So this is the two sides of that. So that's from the perspective of the hadith. So the perspective of the practice, and is it haram or is it halal? What the scholars say, and when did it become a mainstream thing? Historically, and from the ahadith, we see, from narrations of the scholars, from the sayings of the scholars, we see that this is a practice that's about 200 or so years old, approximately. We don't see much evidence to state that it was widely practiced prior to that time, prior to 200 years. So it's something fairly new. And this is more evidence about that is because if you look in the books of the previous scholars, they didn't mention it, whether it be haram or halal. It wasn't something that was brought to their attention. Can people do this or not? So we see it's a fairly relatively new practice. It's not old. Well, is it haram or is it halal? Most of the scholars, since the time it has been widely practiced till now, most of the scholars have said it's acceptable with some conditions, and they have some reasons for that. There's been an exception of about 2 scholars who said that this was haram in itself. The act itself is haram. One was Muhsin Amin, was a scholar in Lebanon. The other one was Fadullah, who passed away. And also, there was Sayyid Khomeini, he made it haram in the public, but according to his fiqh, he said it's not haram of itself. And the reason for why they're saying that is because they said that if an action is done for the way of Imam Hussein and has now become associated with the mourning of Imam Hussein, it can be halal as long as it doesn't lead to any kind of severe injury. So this is what they have said, most of them. Now today, there's some newer opinions coming, and many people are saying to not do it in public. And all the scholars have put a condition on that. All the scholars who have said it's halal, which is a majority, they have put a condition that if people practice this act in public, and it causes a bad view of the Shia, they should avoid it. Allah says in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, حَسَّبَ النَّاسُ أَنْ يَتْرُكُوا أَنْ يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يَفْتَنُونَ. So Allah says in the Quran, do people say that they believe and that they think that they will not be tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do you think that there is no test from Allah? What does it mean to be tested? Here the word, in this verse, the root is fatana. Fatana. Fatana, if we go to the dictionary, it means to test, and also the old meaning of that, if we go to the lexicons of the Arabic language, it means to take like a piece of gold and to purify it in fire. Silver and to purify it in fire. Testing it, making it pure. This is what it means. So Allah says, if you say you are a believer and you believe, there will be tests and there will be a way to purify you. Oh. Many of us, we think everything in our life is test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that correct? First, we have to look who Allah is addressing in the verse. Those people who believe. And they say, I believe, and there means those believers, those mu'min. Test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it comes for the mu'mineen. It comes from mu'mineen. It doesn't come for everybody. Sometimes we have some trouble in our life and we automatically assume Allah is testing us. We have to look. We have to look. There are different explanations for why something bad happens to you. One, your own actions. There are rules in this world. There are rules in this world. And if you break those rules, you have to face the consequence. And somebody has to understand, if somebody does X, Y, Z, and there's a result for it, that's in their own hands. You can't blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't say this is coming from Allah. If somebody does something very stupid, and they hurt themselves, and then they say, oh Allah, He's going to raise my level up, this is incorrect. This is making a joke of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and making a joke of the religion. If you do something very stupid and ignorant, and it causes harm to yourself, you did this to yourself. Allah tells you to learn. The Prophet mentions that. Learn and don't take action unless you have consulted with people. This is a hadith from Ahl Bayt. It says consult with people before you take action. So, one, the rules of this world are applied to everybody. Everybody. Second reason for bad things and all these things coming on, it's not again testing. Punishment from Allah. There's many. Look, Imam Ali, when we read Dua Kamil, how many times he mentions, oh Allah, save me from those sins which bring down this punishment, this punishment, brings down this misfortune on me. And we have many hadiths from Ahl Bayt about that. Many hadiths. And that if there are certain actions that you do, there will be a result for that. For example, some of the ones, when we say bala in Dua Kamil, which bring down the big misfortunes, what are some of those? One of them, it says, making fun of another believer. If somebody makes fun of another believer, humiliates another believer, this will bring down misfortune on them in this life. And also, it's on the Day of Judgment. There's a hadith about that. It says those people who humiliate the other believers in this life, Allah will humiliate them in the next life. Another action which brings down this type of disrespecting parents and being very bad to the parents also brings down the believer. Another action as well as mentioned is zina, adultery, and all other forms of debauchery. It says they will bring down this type of bill. So there's many things that people have to look at. Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Am I doing this? Is it test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or is it punishment from Allah? Don't think also punishment is always bad. Punishment is also rahmah. It's a rahmah for you. If somebody sees this is happening to them, they should stop and think, say, am I doing something wrong? I should fix myself. Also, getting the punishment now is much better than getting it in the next life. And we have many narrations about that. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has punished you now in this life, you won't get that punishment in the barzakh or in the akhirah, in the grave or in Jahannam. So the punishment in this life is very small, nothing compared to that grave punishment which can come in the next life. So these punishments can also be a great mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But is it a test that will bring the iman up? Test is different. When the test, like we said, test is what purifies the person. This can lead to testing. It can lead to that. Because, for example, when somebody, he's done this sin, and then now he understands, I did a very bad sin, Allah's punished me, now I have to seek repentance. Now he's getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the test is for the mu'min, the real believer. So that when, for example, he hasn't committed sin, and he hasn't done something completely ignorant, stupid, and then troubles fall on him. Then it's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which elevates the status of the person. So that, for example, in the hadith it says, those Shia of ours, where they're not committing sins, and they have many troubles in this life, Allah will reward them so much in the next life. So much that they wish that they would be cut to pieces in this life by these troubles. So I have to understand that. And we also have to understand that to get to this level where we can be tested from Allah, we have to first reach just the minimum level of not sinning. Being repentant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, leaving these sins. Repentance is very important. It's very important to remember in this month, especially this night of Friday, the Jummah, which is where Allah has opened the doors of mercy for everybody, especially on these nights. Imam Baqir Islam, he says, whoever calls to Allah, Allah is listening on this night. He tells His angels, if there is a person in need, if there is somebody who's repenting, whoever, bring it to me. Grant it for them. This night is very blessed. Especially in this month of Muharram, where we have so many narrations about mourning for Abu Abdullah and how it purifies your soul and takes away, helps you remove those sins. It's too many, I couldn't even mention them. And so many stories from Ahlul Bayt of Islam. And we see that the majlis of Abu Abdullah Islam, it changes people. There's a beautiful story I heard about a man in Iran. He was not a good person. So he was a very bad person. And his name is Ali Gandabi. Well, he lived outside of a village in near Hamadan. And he's buried in Najaf now. So what happened with the story? I said a scholar went there to recite the majlis of Abu Abdullah Islam in the month of Muharram there. And this person did a lot of very bad things, disrespectful things. And people knew him to be like a gangster. They had an altercation between the scholar and the man. They had an altercation, and they had to exchange some words, and things happened. So that scholar goes and he leaves, and Ali Gandabi goes on his way. That night, says that this man Ali Gandabi comes to that scholar, and he has in his hand a bottle of liquor, and he's drunk, and he has a weapon in his hand. He says, "You insulted me today. I've come to take revenge." And he tells him, "Ali, don't you have any shame? Don't you know that this is the month of Muharram? These are the nights of Abu Abdullah, these nights of Abu al-Faz, and you come here drunk?" He says, "Which night is it?" He said, "This was the night of Abu al-Faz." He said, "Recite for me." He said, "Recite now?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Ali, what are you talking about?" He said, "I want you to recite. I want you to recite or I'll kill you." He had a weapon. He said, "Let me hear this story." He recites for him. And I said, this young man, he said, all of a sudden I saw this Ali change. He dropped his weapon, he dropped his bottle of liquor. He said, "What am I doing?" He said, "What have I done?" He said, "On these nights I'm acting like this." He's heard the story of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he understood. He asked the scholar. He said, "Oh, Hajj Allah." He said, I heard you study in Najaf. Is it true?" He said, "Bali." He said, "Could you go to the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam for me and seek forgiveness for me because I disrespected his sons?" He said, "Inshallah, when I go back to Najaf." He said, I'm making tawbah. So, that scholar, he went to the people the next day. He said, "Oh people, I have an announcement for you." He said, Ali Gandabi, he made tawbah. He made tawbah. And people were very shocked. They said, we never heard of this. We couldn't imagine this happening. So he said, "Let's go to his house and congratulate him. Let's bring him to the community. Let's open our arms and take him." So they go to his house, his wife is there. They said, where's Ali? She says, Ali left. Where? He said, last night he told me he was acting very strange, and then he said, I'm going to Karbala, that's it. He said, he was yelling about making tawbah. He said, I'm leaving, I'm going to Karbala now. In the middle of the night he left, he went to Karbala. They didn't hear about Ali 1 month, 2 months. Finally they get a letter from him. He says, I'm in Karbala, I made this yard, I went to Najaf now. And then he was in Najaf al-Ashraf. At that time the scholar, Mirza Muhammad Taqi Shirazi, he was the scholar who was in charge of Najaf at that time. He used to lead the prayers. He said Ali, after a while, he got a good relationship with him. Ali used to pray behind Mirza Muhammad. So he said that one day a scholar died in Najaf, and the people came to Mirza, and they said, the scholar has died, Scholar Fulan, and we need to bury him. What should we do? He said, okay, there's a plot next to one of the doors where people enter into the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He said, dig that place there. It's next to the place where the Zawar come in. So he said, dig that place there and we'll bury that scholar there. Oh. Later that day, they come back. They said, we dug the grave, but we made a mistake. That scholar didn't die. We thought he died. He was sick and people thought he passed away, but he was alive. What should we do with the grave? Mirza said, leave it. Probably there's some hikmah in this. There's some wisdom in this. And he said, then later that night, while they were praying the Isha prayers, they finished the Isha prayers, and people saw that Ali, he didn't raise up from his sajda. He was in sajda. From after the prayer, he went to sajda, and people said he didn't stand up. And they were looking, and he's still sitting there. After a while, they went to Mirza, they said, Mirza, I think, we don't know what happened. Ali's not getting up, so they go there, and they try to wake him, and they find he passed away. He passed away. And then Mirza told him, he said, you know what Ali said in his sajda? He said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. He said, I came to make tawbah for my actions. He said, I heard there was a spot open where your Zawar come. Under the feet of the people who visit you. Can I have that place? And can I be there under the feet of your Zawar for eternity? Majestic. The Majlis of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, the Majlis of Karbala, it's a miracle. So many miracles. People talk about how many miracles happen from, the mu'jizat that they see, but the real miracle is how it changes the hearts of the people. That somebody whose heart is hard can become very soft, and they can turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this majlis. So tonight, I want to take you to the camp of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. In that camp in the night before Ashura, all the people were gathered, and the children and the nephews of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam were standing around and they were speaking. And they were talking about who's going to go first to sacrifice themselves on the day of Ashura. So all the children, they were saying, I'm going to go first, I'm going to go first, I'm going to go first. And then there was one of them, Qasim, the son of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. And he said, let me go first. They said, why? He said, because I'm an orphan. I don't have a father. No one will miss me. Let me be the first to go. And they say, Imam Hussein heard and he came and he ran and he hugged Qasim and he hugged him. And he said, Ya Qasim, you are not an orphan. I am like your father. And on that day of Ashura, after so many people went to the battlefield, they left, and so many people went. Hazrat Qasim, he went to his uncle Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and he said, please, my uncle, I beg you the permission to let me fight. He said, I can't. I can't bear to see you fight. You are like a son to me. He begged his uncle, he kissed his hands, he kissed his feet. He said, Ammi, please, let me go. Let me go. Imam said, I can't let you go. It's too difficult for me. Then Qasim, he said, he went to his mother, he said, please, my uncle Hussein, he won't let me go, what should I do? His mother gave him a letter. She said, take this letter. Take this letter to your uncle Imam Hussein. He went and he took the letter to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And Imam Hussein opened it. He said, this is the handwriting of my brother Imam al-Hassan. And in the letter it said, oh my brother, I will not be there for you on that day. La yawmika yawmika ya Aba Abdullah. In that day which there is no day like it. And he said, and on my stead, I want you to take my son, Qasim. He is there to represent me on that day of Ashura. Imam Hussein said, how could I resist in this request from my brother? He said, Qasim, I give you permission to fight, but go visit your mother, please. I know she misses you very much, and she loves you very much. He goes to his mother, and his mother tells him, Ya Qasim, my wish in this life was to see you get married. And now I see you not going to get married. I have here that dress that your father wore on his wedding day. Could you just put it on? I just want to see you in it. Can you imagine a mother? All the mothers, they want to see their sons and children get married. And they like to see that day. This mother has to see the day her son goes and he goes to die. He puts on that dress and they said he looked just like Imam Hassan on that day. They sent him to the battlefield with his armor on. And he cried to the people, I am Qasim, son of Hassan, son of Ali. I have learned the sword from my father and my uncle. Who's going to come and fight me? These lains, these murderers, these criminals, they looked at this young boy. He looked like Imam Hassan. Imam Hassan looked just like the Prophet. Look at the hadith. They said Imam Hassan looked like the Prophet. Here they're coming to fight somebody who looks like Rasulullah. This young man. They came at him, and even though he was thirsty for 3 days, he fought with them. He fought, and they said he killed 8 men, and then more, until the battles kept going, and then finally they hit him with arrows. He went off his horse, and he wandered off. There he stood, and look at the iman of this young man, only 13 years old. He stood there, and the enemies are surrounding him. He's just like his grandfather, Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam. At the battle of Siffin, there was a time where there was a man standing in the distance, and he was looking down at his broken sandal. And Muawiyah, he was looking at his general saying, who is that man? And some of them said it's Ali ibn Abi Talib, others said it's not Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said, Muawiyah said, I know how to test it, this is Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said, tell the entire flank, the entire army flank to go at him. And if you see him budge, then you know this is not Amir al-Mu'minin. But if you see him stand his ground, then this is Amir al-Mu'minin. They sent the entire army flank against Amir al-Mu'minin, and he stood there and he stood and he didn't run away and he fixed his broken sandal. This is Amir al-Mu'minin. And here his grandson Qasim was standing there. He had a broken sandal and he didn't care if the enemy was around. He didn't even care for this dunya. Just like his grandfather said, this dunya is worth less than the burp of a goat. It's worth nothing. And there Hazrat Qasim, he stood there with that broken sandal, and he fixed it. He didn't care for this world, and they came at him. They charged at him, and when he wasn't looking and he was fixing that sandal, they hit him on the head with a sword. And then he fell down, he cried to his father, to his uncle, Ya Ammi, Ya Abu Abdullah, Ya Imam al-Hussein, come to me. And Imam Hussein, he came like a lion. He charged through the battlefield, but the smoke had come, and he couldn't get to Qasim in time. The horses came and they trampled on his body. Once the smoke cleared and the horses cleared there, he saw Qasim lying there. He came and Imam Hussein hugged him and he held him close to his chest. And he said, my nephew, you don't know how difficult it is for me to see you like this. How difficult it is for your uncle to not be able to come to help you. How could it come to you, Ya Qasim? He held up there and he wiped the dust from his face. And he said, my brother Hassan, you have sent the sacrifice. Allah has accepted the sacrifice in your stead. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah ولا الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على المرسلين
که اینقدر تماشا دارد، در رگش خون علی را دارد. یا قاسم ابن حسن، این که اینقدر تماشا دارد، در رگش خون علی را دارد. مجتبی آمده تصویر شود، به حسن رفته تماشا دارد. نوجوان 13 ساله، گیسوانی که زده شان حسین، هر قدر دل ببرد